Hi, I'm doing my interview on self-talk, and this is Dr. Shannon, and she works with a lot of athletes here at the University of Louisville. Self-talk is basically any time that you're thinking about something, you're essentially talking to yourself, and this can be used to enhance your concentration, break bad habits, initiate action, sustaining effort, and for acquiring new skills. So, Dr. Shannon, how important is self-talk in the sports arena?
I think it's incredibly important. It's the foundation of everything that I do with athletes. So, I shouldn't say everything. The vast majority of what I do with athletes comes from what we would call kind of a cognitive behavioral framework, which means that the things that we think about influence the way that we behave. Mm-hmm. So in sport, the things that we think about, and as a result, the way that we feel, tend to have a pretty significant impact on the way that we perform. Mm-hmm. So I would say, it's a giant contribution to performance that oftentimes is undervalued and people don't actually think about.
Mm-hmm. There are 4 types of self-talk that we're going to go over. The first is positive, and then negative, instructional, and keywords.
Okay.
For positive / motivational self-talk, it's used to increase self-confidence.
Right.
And how can positive self-talk affect athletes' performance?
Yeah, I think, what's interesting is the first comment I'll make about that is I don't love to use the word positive, and you know this about me, because I think it can send the wrong message. This idea of like rainbows, unicorns, sunshine all the time, right? When you're in the middle of a 400 IM or something, you're probably not thinking about rainbows and unicorns, or it won't be helpful. Mm-hmm. So I understand the intention of that word in our field. I would probably prefer more like motivational, and this idea of kind of a power statement or something that makes you feel confident. Mm-hmm. I think it can be really useful. I think it's entirely dependent on how the athlete feels when they perform their best. Mm-hmm. So some people want to feel confident and strong. Other people want to feel loose and relaxed. Mm-hmm. And so if you're someone who wants to feel loose and relaxed, then a power statement is not really going to get you where you need to be right before a race, right? Yeah. Maybe something different in that same kind of realm of positive motivational self-talk would.
Okay. The next thing is negative self-talk. A lot of people say it creates like anxiety and self-doubt. Yeah. Do you think that this can be used like positively for some people though? Just like
not negative self-talk. Yeah. I think realistic self-talk, which I think sometimes is misinterpreted as negative, right? So if you're standing behind the blocks and you're thinking, wow, I'm really going to be challenged in this race, and I'm going to be physically tested and I'm going to be mentally tested, I don't think that's negative self-talk, as long as it's followed by, but you know what? I'm prepared to meet those challenges. Mm-hmm. Because if you stand outside the pool and you just think every race you swim is going to be fun, gone are those days, right? Maybe when you were in high school, okay? Mm-hmm. So that's a problem, right? So sometimes not negative, but what I would call honest self-talk, I think can actually benefit athletes. Mm-hmm. But I do think some people avoid using that because they think it's negative. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that it's not negative, it's realistic, not just myself. There's a lot of people in the field that would argue that. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And if you see yourself starting to have like the negative thoughts, or you think that you're just having like a bad day, I guess, what's something you can do to like stop that or like change your mindset, do you think?
Yeah, I think, that's a really interesting question, because if somebody comes to my office and they say, like, this is the first time ever that when I raced I got really nervous and I started noticing myself have doubts, okay? If that person's being honest with me, it's a bit of an easier fix than a person who prior to coming here in kind of this, I would say Division I athletics becomes sort of this hyper-competitive environment that we're in, right? Mm-hmm. If someone says, prior to coming here, I have always been very critical of myself, but it's never affected how I race. Those are 2 different situations. The first person, it's an easier fix in that it's not become habitual yet, right? So now it's just like, okay, well, what can we say instead very quickly to kind of remedy the situation? Our mind is a fascinating thing, but at the end of the day, we really can't multitask. We can shift our attention. So if you think about it in that way, we're only capable of technically thinking about one thought at a time. Now, you then have to control that thought and not bounce between thoughts, right? Yeah. Which can be challenging. For the person who comes in who's always been critical and it's been okay, they've been able to be successful despite it, but now they're in this environment and it's like, oh, it's starting to catch up with me, that's more difficult, because then that becomes, well, now we've got to like reframe and readjust your mindset and the way that you think about things, right? I was a very self-critical athlete, and I thought it served me well until I realized that my negative self-talk in volleyball was affecting my teammates, right? So my thought process was always, well, I'm holding myself to a really high standard, so I'm being a good teammate, right? Because if I expect the most out of myself, that means I'm being a good teammate. Well, what I realized over time was it actually makes me a really cruddy teammate, because every time I go internal and criticize myself, I'm not present and I'm useless for my team, right? So sometimes getting people out of those habits takes kind of reframing, like, what you think the use of the negative self-talk is and how it's actually detrimental instead. Okay.
Next is instructional self-talk, which helps individuals focus on technical or task-related aspects. And something that I read was like volleyball players use the word extend when they're about to spike. And so like that reminds them.
Extend,
So why do you think that using like a technical word like that is so helpful to people, like with remembering?
I think it's helpful because, old habits die hard, right? So and we'll use myself as a prime example of that. I am 5'7.5" when I was in college. I've shrunk a little bit since then. I'm only 40, but still, you shrink when you jump up and down your whole life. Sopping wet probably, but I had actually a really good vertical. But then when I got to college, I was playing against women who were 6'2" and had a really good vertical. And so one thing I would get away with in high school with a smaller block was dropping my arm, right? So that kind of reach, extend, reach was what I always said to myself. I want to hit the ball at the apex, right? At the pinnacle of the set. That was useful to me because my old habit when I got lazy and when I got tired and when my arm got tired would just be to drop my arm, right? So having always then saying to myself, reach, always. When I was serving, I would have a low toss as I got tired, right? So what I would say to myself in high school, I kind of trained myself to say, okay, I'm going to serve area 2 or area 5, whatever service area had been called by the coach. And if I did that, then I knew in order to effectively serve it to that spot, I had to get my toss up, right? Whereas saying to myself, like, good toss or get your toss up didn't necessarily help. So it was more directed at what I want to accomplish rather than avoiding what I don't want to accomplish, right?
And the last thing was with keywords. They're like instructional and motivate us to focus on the task at hand. What are some useful tools for making a keyword, do you think?
Keywords, just the biggest thing is they have to be sticky, right? So they have to be meaningful to you. So you can come in and you can tell me, I think I need a focus cue, let's say, as an example, because in between races, I tend to get a little distracted. And if I swim a really good first race in a dual meet or in a championship meet, and then like my next race, I'm kind of feeling good and I get a little lackadaisical, I need something to kind of up my focus. And if I say to you, oh man, I think lift would be a great word, like lift your focus, right? And to you, you're like, I don't know, when I hear the word Lyft, I think of that like Uber service, right? There's a thing called Lyft, like a cab service. So it has to be sticky for you. It has to be impactful for you. So I usually say to people, like, let's go, even if it's totally doesn't seem to connect, let's go to like a quote that you love, or let's go to a song lyric, or if people are faithful, let's go to a meaningful religious scripture reading or something that will really connect with them. And then can we pick a piece of it that might give meaning to what you're trying to do? And generally speaking, I think that tends to work better than other things. I think the other piece with keywords is you want it to sort of create an image in your mind. Okay, so there's a man named Tim Elmore who's a kind of a leadership guru is a bad word because that makes him sound like he doesn't know what he's doing, but he does. He's got a corporation called Growing Leaders, okay? And he's got a series of kind of teachings called Habitudes. And the premise behind it is that our mind connects really well to images right now because of the influx of technology and how often we see things presented with images. So I might, like, we've been talking a lot about as a team about this idea of surf, right? Riding the waves. Can you get back on the board, paddle out, right? You got to pop up, all these things. And that creates an image in people's minds. So they tend to be able to connect to that.
Okay. There are two types of communication, interpersonal and intrapersonal. Interpersonal involves at least two people and a meaningful exchange, basically like a casual conversation. And intrapersonal is communication with ourselves. Of these two types of communication, which one do you think impacts people more?
Well, the irony is the thing that should impact us the most is the intrapersonal, the conversations that we're having with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I think nowadays, interpersonal communication is a little bit stunted because we're used to sending text messages and emails.
Yeah.
And so it's ironic because it becomes less impactful in that we aren't as good at it. But it's become more impactful, I think, in the day of social media where our self-confidence has become more interdependent on what others think of us. Mm-hmm. So the difficult answer to that, I would say, is probably it's even. Like, it shouldn't be. It should be more focused on intrapersonal. And of course, you need to have conversations with your coaches.
Yeah.
You need to have conversations with your teammates.
Yeah.
When we have an interacting team like field hockey, soccer, they need to have a lot of conversations with their teammates, mm-hmm. especially during competition. So those are definitely impactful, but I think, probably most impactful is what we're saying to ourselves and whether or not we're aware of how much it affects our performance.
Mm-hmm. And when you're communicating with someone, it's important to have active listening, and because this involves attending to main and supporting ideas and acknowledging and responding. How does people actively listening affect how we communicate with others?
Oh, I think it affects it significantly. I think we're terrible listeners now. I think even I'm guilty of that, right? Because I don't know. It just, again, the texting, the technical communication, technological communication that happens between us now just really, like, we don't have to listen. You're just going to send me a text back and I can read it and there's not a whole lot of listening involved and I just respond to it, right? Yeah. It's very like read, respond right now. So I think it can impact it significantly, especially because, sometimes it's not what you say, it's what people hear. Mm-hmm. And so, especially when coaches are giving feedback to athletes, teaching athletes then to kind of not just actively listen, but critically listen, I think can become very important. Yeah. Because I think, as you know, sometimes we get caught on kind of the emotion and the tone that's delivering the feedback, mm-hmm. and we're not used to sifting through that. We're used to like a little emoji there that helps us identify that.
Yeah.
And so we can get hung up on it, or we can misinterpret it, and then we cannot actually hear the message. So the usefulness of active listening, specifically things like summarizing and kind of repeating the message to make sure that there's clarity there, I think can be very useful.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that goes along with communication is communication blocks. Do you think like technology and stuff is a communication block in society now?
I do. I mean, especially when it comes to athletics, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it would be different if everybody on a football team, when they went like this, they didn't have a play card, they had a mini iPhone and their coach could like text in the play, yeah. right? And then technology serves a purpose. Uh-huh. But right now I think that all these advances have stunted our overall emotional IQ, and part of emotional IQ is social skills and our ability to communicate with others, and in some part that's dependent on our ability to pick up on nonverbals and their emotions without them just telling us, and so now we're sort of back to, like, I'm back sometimes to where an athlete's sitting in my office and they might have a smirk on their face, and whereas 10 years ago when I first graduated from grad school, I thought, oh, that smirk, because we're talking about their coach, must represent like dissension or resent, right, or contempt. Mm-hmm. But now I'm like, I don't know, what does the smirk represent? Like, are you just smirking because just generally you smirk because you lack awareness of your own facial expression? Or are you smirking because you think your coach is funny? So now I'm more so have to ask athletes, like, what, something's going on right here, you're trying to communicate something to me, but I'm not picking up what you're putting down. What are you feeling right now?
Yeah.
And then talk about it.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about communication between athletes and coaches, mm-hmm. and along with that comes a lot of criticisms from coaches and stuff like that. Something you've done with our team is the sandwich method.
Right.
Can you talk a little about that and how to implement that into
Yeah, I think, and actually I talked about this in a class the other day. I think the sandwich method can be a really good way for delivering critical feedback to many of our athletes on campus, mm-hmm. because most of you all have come here having received very little feedback, critical feedback, right? Yeah. Because when you think about it, and I don't know what the statistics are for every sport, but on average, in terms of female athletes in particular, those who play that sport as a senior in high school and then go on to play it at the Division I level or compete in it at the Division I level, mm-hmm. it's like between 1% to 2%. Okay, so that's pretty small percentage, right? So when you think about it, on your high school team, you likely were getting way less critical feedback than the rest of your teammates who are likely not swimming Division I athletics right now, right?
Yeah.
And so then when you get here and our coaches' jobs are to help you win, right, and be successful,
Yeah.
and they have a very short period of time to spend with you, they're going to spend a lot of it giving that critical feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be really uncomfortable for athletes when they first get here. So using a sandwich method where you sort of like saddle up to them and say, like, good race. Let's talk about the middle there a little bit. Like, can we change something here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But keep working on the other end of it.
Yeah.
I think the key piece to the sandwich method is the last piece of bread, or we call it the Oreo method, the last piece of cookie, because if that's too positive and it's not action focused, it can prevent them from remembering the fact that there was a piece of critical feedback. And so now the person leaves and they're just like, I swam great, right? Well, it's
Yeah.
like, well, you did, but there's still work that needs to be done. So I think that that piece of bread needs to be more, let's keep working on it. You know, and this is positive in nature, but it's also action focused. We're working on it moving forward.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the interview.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was fun. Bye-bye.